I'd like to talk about a topic that is very urgent in these times of the pandemic, namely the stress and the suffering that people are undergoing because of this COVID-19 coronavirus and the influence it has on their daily lives. A lot of people have lost their jobs or are uncertain about getting their job back in the future. They have been facing illness, sometimes death of relatives, and difficult situations where their present and their future are very uncertain. So now the question is, with the help of the Buddha's teachings, and especially with mindfulness or sati, can we do something about this situation of getting stressed and frustrated and suffering under the circumstances? So perhaps it's a good idea to separate the external stress factors like the social, economic, even political situation, and also the coronavirus pandemic having a grip on the health and well-being of people around the world, both their physical health, but also their mental health, and even their economic situation. All these factors may be seen as external factors that influence us in our daily situation, in our mind, and even in our body, in our family life. Now, for instance, children who can't go to school and who have to do their learning online, sitting behind the computer the whole day, not seeing their friends, not being able to go out to the park or wherever they like to play, and having to be inside the house most of the time, they get frustrated. The parents who are also having to stay home, some of them also having to work from home at the computer online, and not having much movement, not being able to go out, not meeting their friends and colleagues also by going to the office. Everybody is in a different situation than before the pandemic took place. So the coronavirus has changed so many things in our external world, and now we have to cope with it as much as we can with our mind facing these external circumstances. Because we cannot really change the external circumstances. Well, of course, nurses, doctors, politicians, health carers, they can all help in overcoming the sickness. Not that one gets quickly better, but at least the medical facilities can be opened to look after the sick people. But in the case of being confined to the home and the children having to learn only online, the parents working online, they're confined to a relatively small space that they were not used to otherwise. So that has brought about quite a lot of stress. Now, the stress factors can be divided into external stress, that is from the circumstances outside of us, as we mentioned, the changing nature of our social economic environment, and also the internal stress, the way that we react to the outside world. That is sometimes a very important stress factor. If we do not accept the situation as it is, and we try to fight it, but we cannot get what we want, our frustration becomes bigger, our stress becomes bigger, we become more and more dissatisfied with what is happening, and we are dissatisfied with what we have. Well, of course, a lot of people have lost their income. Those who were and are dependent on tourism, for instance, in Sri Lanka, but also other parts of the world. But here we are talking about the situation in Sri Lanka. Those who are depending on tourism at the moment, they don't have any income from tourism. So they're losing a lot of money. Maybe they have borrowed a lot of money. They're worried about whether they will be able to repay that kind of money. They have laid off quite a lot of their workers. Some hotels managed to keep the workers and giving their salary, but not everybody was in that lucky situation. So there are lots of factors which are influencing people and making them feel very uncomfortable, to say the least, and to feel very unhappy and very stressed out, very suffering under the circumstances. On the other hand, if we look at the internal stress factors, they very often come from not accepting the situation as it is and expecting something different to happen from what is actually the case. So the more we expect and the less we get it, the more suffering actually ensues. And in that way, we become more and more frustrated, more and more angry sometimes, more and more unhappy, and that may actually not solve the problem at all. Whereas, if we keep the teaching of the Buddha in mind, santutti paramang dhanang, that is, if we are satisfied with what we have, that is the greatest wealth. We can see that also in people who are able to accept the situation, not to desire more at this time, and to be able to live with what they earn and not to crave for more. Well, they are at least up to that point satisfied with what they have. Another thing that we can contemplate by mindfulness is that all situations are changing. They're never exactly the same. And if you look back for the last, let's say, 100 years, that is, till about 1920, or even a little bit before that, people who were growing up in those days, let's say in 1900, there's a little video clip where you can see somebody who is born in 1900, what they went through during their lifetime. First of all, when they were 14, the First World War broke out. It lasted for 4 years. It devastated 22 million people were killed during that time. And then also the Spanish flu, what is called the Spanish flu, is also a kind of coronavirus, which killed 50 million people, not only in Spain, but also around the world. So that happened in that short time. Not only that, in 1929, there was the great crash of the American, financial market. And that ruined many, many people. So that person would have been by that time 29, 30 years old, and gone through those sufferings, but somehow or other they came out of it once again. As soon as they were recovered, they had another setback, namely 1940 till 45, or from 1939 till 1945, the Second World War. I remember my own parents, when they had sometimes difficult times, they would say to each other, well, we got through the Second World War also, didn't we? And they managed to get through. They managed to climb up after that, and through some struggle, they managed to become better off again after that. So sometimes when we're in the middle of a situation, when we are sick, for instance, it looks like we'll be sick forever. There are certain illnesses, of course, which we cannot cure, but certain illnesses are temporary. And a lot of situations are temporary. Nothing is lasting. Everything is changing. Only if we expect the things to be different, if we think that they'll last forever, we get very frustrated and dissatisfied with that kind of situation. Therefore, we have to contemplate with mindfulness that this will also pass. Even the pandemic, which started, well, around, let's say, February, March 2020, that also is going to come to an end sometime. We only have to have patience. Now, patience, or kshanti, is one of the good qualities, the Dasa Paramitas. If we don't have kshanti or khanti or patience, then actually we will be more and more frustrated and more angry and not able to accept a situation. So kshanti or khanti, patience, is a very good quality that the Buddha has also taught us. So it is the insight into the changing nature, the anicca of the, whole situation. Everything is changing. Sabbe sankhara anicca. And if we see that, and if we accept it, and if we realize that this is also going to pass and is not going to last forever, then at least we can keep our mental equilibrium, our upeksha, our mental balance. If we lose our mental balance, and if we are not accepting situation as it is, and if we are hoping that this will be over very quickly, and we can't get what we want, then we only increase our own suffering, our own difficulties. So it is a good idea through mindfulness come to insight, the mindfulness of everything having a beginning, a middle, and an end. That means anicca, or changing, and also that these circumstances, these conditionings, are actually dissatisfactory or unsatisfactory. They are a form of dukkha. We are, of course, now used, since the wars more or less were over, to a luxury life and a happy life, and thinking there is real happiness in getting a bigger car and having a time to go to the movies and going on holidays and traveling, maybe all over the world. But for the moment, we can't do that. And it's not that we will not be able to do it forever, but it may take some time. And if we are able to have that patience and equilibrium, and realize that everything is changing, it may come back to another normal situation. Then actually we will be better off, mentally and actually with our mind. So our mental situation in the pandemic is depending on ourselves quite a lot. Actually, we are responsible for our own mind, we are responsible for our own actions, but there of course are also circumstances that we have no control over. Those external factors which are impinging upon us and we can't really do anything about, those we have to more or less accept them the way they are and see how our own mental health and our peace of mind are actually increasing the way that we, and the more that we accept the situation as it is. And then you actually see, yes, this situation is changing, it will not last forever. It is in itself an unsatisfactory situation, it is dukkha, but the causes of the dukkha lie within ourselves, mainly by clinging and by condemning and by identifying ourselves with all this as me, mine, my own, myself. If we do that, then actually we will be more and more dissatisfied and therefore suffering more and more under all these circumstances. So if we are able to let go, that is a very important word in Buddhism, atharima, letting go, not to cling. Clinging leads to suffering. Letting go leads to peace and happiness. If we can do that, then we are able to actually live more peacefully and more happily, and we will be able to face other situations from moment to moment more bravely, more calmly, and with more wisdom, and maybe with more understanding, and also with more loving kindness and compassion. We are not the only ones, that is another factor. Sometimes we think we are the only one who is suffering, but actually, if you really look at it at this time, the whole world is suffering. It's not just me. So, if we can have more what is called karuna and compassion towards the suffering of other beings, then perhaps our own suffering becomes less significant, less important, and it will be replaced by more positive thoughts of compassion and the wish for well-being for all other beings. Maybe to start with all human beings, but also all animals and other beings. And whatever good that we do, if we do some good in this world, we can always also share that goodness in thought and intention with other beings, even with those who have passed away. That is, the whole world is consisting of, let's say, humans, animals, and devas, and brahmas, pretas, and beings in the hellish realms. All these 6 layers of beings, they are all hoping for happiness, and they are all living in different realms, experiencing more suffering or less suffering, or more happiness and more happiness. So if we have experienced some happiness, or let's say we have done something good, then that goodness, if you share it with others, anybody, maybe people who have passed away, we believe that that helps, not only the person who has passed away, but even yourself, that kind of thought transference through the kind of connection that we have between mind-to-mind transference of telepathy, that will actually reach the other being, and they will be feeling that as a kind of happiness that is coming their way. And maybe they will be blessing the person who has transferred that merit. So in that way, sharing whatever good you've done, sharing sometimes also physical things. If you have something like food given to the poor or to orphanage and things like that, that kind of sharing also can help to overcome stress and sorrow. It can lead to your own peace and happiness. So we can do a lot of positive things in this world. It's not all gloom and doom. This is a very difficult period, but do remember that it is not forever. It had a start. It's sometimes been at its peak, then again less, and then more. And we will overcome this by the ingenuity of the scientists who are developing these vaccines. And also we have to overcome the suffering by our own attitude, the change of attitude, the realization of truth through the practice of mindfulness, and therefore we can perhaps not change the pandemic in itself, although efforts are being made by getting everyone to get a vaccine. That will help a lot to overcome the pandemic, but actually speaking, the attitude of the people, if more people think like this and behave like this and realize like this and practice mindfulness and patience and kindness and generosity and wisdom, then the whole world will be uplifted. Actually, the consciousness of mankind also plays a role in this. It's not just all physical, it's also mental and spiritual. So let us hope that in Sri Lanka, all the citizens, all beings will be well, peaceful and happy, and all will be benefited by thinking positively about these things and get to know through wisdom the way out of this suffering of the pandemic, and that all beings may be well, peaceful and happy. Tiruvan Saranai.